Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for
Hey,
being here.
thanks for having us.
Yeah. I thought the best thing to start off with is just to learn a little bit about each of you. That way, in case the audience didn't know, they had the opportunity to just learn a little bit about each. Who would like to start?
I can go. Hey,
Uh,
everyone. So I am Camille Dundas. I am the co-founder and editor-in-chief of online magazine byblacks.com. That's BYBLACKS.com. We were founded in 2013. And we have grown the company to become the number one Black online magazine in Canada. Disclosure, we are mostly self-funded. We have not yet done any of the rounds. Hopefully in 2021, we're focused now on making the company investor ready. But a little backstory, we started the company. My background is in media and journalism, and my husband and I started this company. I had a front seat, I guess, to how the Black community in Canada is covered by mainstream media. And spoiler alert, it's not good. We're either portrayed on two extremes. We're either it's our mugshots up on the screen, or we're the exception. We're Oprah. And what we knew for sure is that our lives were filled with Black excellence. Our circles were filled with people doing amazing things with their lives. And so we wanted to create a platform where we could showcase amazing Black entrepreneurs, small business owners, artists, educators, everyone in between who are doing amazing things. And we've so far gotten 2 national ethnic press awards. We've gotten a commendation from the Prime Minister. Starting from a point when I recall when my husband went for the first business loan we attempted to go for, the loan officer, after my husband told him the idea, said, "That will never work because Black people don't support each other." And so 7 years
wow.
later, we're still proving people wrong. On both sides of the fence, I've gotten feedback such as it's too niche, it will never work, you need to expand it beyond the Black community, et cetera, et cetera. So we've stuck to our vision, not only keeping it focused on the Black community, but the Black Canadian community. We would love to expand and have a Buy Blacks US, Buy Blacks UK, but for now we are still focused on Canada.
Thank you so much, Camille, and thank you for tuning in here from Toronto, right?
Yes, Toronto, Canada.
All the way from Toronto. Thank you, Camille.
I love it. I love that you focus on a niche. That's awesome. I'm Alex.
Oh, we lost you. Oh, you're back.
Oh, can you hear me?
Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, you're good.
Good. I'm Alex Batdorf. I'm the founder and CEO of Get Shit Done. We are a digital platform and community helping female founders gain enough traction to scale their company successfully. So a little background on me and what kind of led me here was an accumulation of over a decade's experience building and scaling businesses. I started my first company at 19, so I have never experienced what it's like working for anybody else. And my first 2 companies were in the fashion tech space. So I have experience both bootstrapping and raising capital from angels and venture capitalists. And it's funny because right now I'm in Chicago, which is where I built my first 2 companies, but I live in New York now. But I started Get Shit Done from an accumulation of those 2 experiences with my first companies, 2 companies. And it was really based on the experience of what it's like as a woman scaling a business, especially a Black woman scaling a business, if you're underserved in general, and the challenges of getting there. So I noticed as we got more scaling success in my last company, I mean, we had raised a couple million, we had scaled to the multi-million, so on and so forth. And it was very easy for people to tokenize my experience because they're like, whoa, you're a woman who is, scaled and has been able to raise capital, and you're a Black woman that's done it. Oh my God, like you must be the voice for everybody. And it's just like, absolutely not. And as we were getting more scaling success, I just noticed there were less and less people at the table that looked like me, whether it's gender or race. And I really wanted to understand, well, why is that? And it's very easy for folks to zone in on the conversation around raising capital. So everyone thinks, oh my God, women are only getting 2% of funding dollars. And it's just like, okay, I'm a systems thinker by nature, my background sociology. So I'm always looking at the bigger picture. And I'm like, that is not the problem, but I need to understand and educate myself on what the fundamental issue here, what is the systemic issue here? And the systemic issue is really not funding. Like if you zoom out of that 2% that people talk about, they're like, look, women are starting companies at a much higher rate, so on and so forth, and they're only getting 2% of capital. But I'm like, that's like, I mean, if everybody, 0.004% of funding dollars goes to entrepreneurs. So basically what we're saying, 99% of you are left out of this conversation. So I'm like, that's not the fundamental issue here. So let's go even deeper. Now, when we went a little deeper, it was that women make up nearly 50% of entrepreneurs, 42% of entrepreneurs. Our companies only generate 4% of total business revenues. That is the fundamental issue. No one talks about it because it's like, woe is us, we're not getting capital dollars. And it's like, that's not the problem, because most companies that I know when they start, they have self-funded like Camille. They have gotten it to a certain point to get the traction. It's kind of, think of it as the stock market, right? You're probably not putting your dollars in. I mean, you can't even get on the stock market. A company can't get on the stock market without some history of performance. So why are we treating any entrepreneur's company as you should be expected to get capital when there's no traction or history of performance? So what we need to fundamentally do, and what we focus on at Get Shit Done, is how do we enable female entrepreneurs to take control and focus on the thing that she can actually generate, that she can actually control, and help her company through. And that's the traction piece. How to acquire more customers, how to get those sales, how to do business development, so on and so forth. Because if we continue to look at these little niche problems and zone in on the things that are really a small portion of it, we're looking at the surface and not the system. So that's where Get Shit Done came from. It's that accumulation of experience of building and scaling myself and looking at the landscape and what people were saying the problem is. And I'm just like, we're not moving, and we're not moving the needle because we are not looking at the fundamental issue here, which is the ability for female entrepreneurs to get barriers removed out of their way so they can get the traction, so they can scale and attract those partnerships, attract those investors, so on and so forth. So yeah, that's what led me to Get Shit Done.
I love that. And I think, Alex, one of your superpowers is, being able to dive and see really clearly into bigger issues. And that's the reason I invited you. I kept quoting you in some of your articles that you've written in multiple conversations. I would say probably a dozen conversations. I was like quoting you. And I was chatting with Camille about this panel, and I was saying, and I was quoting you again, and I think she said, maybe you should invite her. You should probably invite her. And I so appreciate both of you being here. The reason I invited each of you was because so for Camille, I watched a number of your videos where you had spoke at events about inclusion and diversity. And you have a real skill with being able to just be clear and communicate it in a way that everybody can understand. And I think you'll add a lot of value. You don't have to have gotten funding to talk about these systemic issues and these big issues. So just so everyone knows me, I'm Andrew. I started Meet Founders during lockdown. Because first of all, I'm just addicted to events, and second of all, because I want to have real talks and connect folks in the industry who know things and folks who need to learn things. And I think we're also doing that in this panel here, except even more so in this panel than other panels. We're speaking to to investors even more than other folks. But I think having everybody involved in the industry is important in making some systemic changes. So, Alex, where I wanted to jump off, just to kind of have a general idea of the conversation for everybody as we jump in, is an article you wrote, which really, again, just got to the heart of a systemic issue in the industry right now. And the title of the article was Black Founders Are Not Charity. What made you title the article that? And why don't we start the conversation off about why Black founders are not charity?
Yeah, great question. So it kind of goes, when I look at why we started Get Shit Done for, female entrepreneurs, I see a lot of the same issues in other underserved communities, and especially the Black community, and how funding dollars get deployed. So this is something that came up once, everything hit the fan with George Floyd. It's basically shit that was already there, just bubbled up to the surface. That's what this moment is. This is not anything new. People are just forced to sit with the shit now because they're not as distracted.
To interrupt, it is new for folks who haven't had to face this before.
Yes, who haven't had to face
for
it.
For a lot of folks, for example, in the VC industry who are white, they haven't felt the need to learn about this, haven't felt the need to learn about these issues. And for a lot of them, it is new, which is really interesting, especially for me coming from, California, and I lived in LA for a long time, where very much race is an issue that everybody's talking about. But I think it's important that a lot of the folks have not faced this, and I think that's one of the problems. But sorry, please keep going.
I'll rephrase it. Oppression's not new. This is not a new thing.
Totally.
What is new is that our new reality has forced us to sit with it. Whereas before, we could get distracted because, Eric Gardner, all these different people, Philando Castile, like this was happening, Sandra Bland, this has been happening for so long. But because we're forced to be at home, we are more heightened and sensitive to the matters at hand. So it might be new for people who are now forced to sit with it, but oppression's not new. So where that article came from is there was so much happening in terms of reactiveness after George Floyd, especially, I'm speaking to the startup ecosystem because that's my world, the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And you started seeing a lot of companies, even corporations, that were responding to the problem through an email, like the Google guy, like the Google CEO or the Apple CEO. And it's just like an email's not enough. Like that's not enough, a tweet. And then you have people who are like, let's donate dollars. One in particular is Andreessen Horowitz. I respect that fund very much so. I've read Ben Horowitz' Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's one of my favorite books. But what I was really frustrated with is that the way they responded is that we're going to spin off a $2 million fund for Black founders. Now, if you look at this issue holistically, it was a lot of the language they used too. First of all, Andreessen Horowitz is one of the largest funds in the world. They have multi-billion-dollar in assets. Like saying you're going to give $2 million to Black founders is actually a slap in the face because your job is to find deal flow. Your job is to find deals that are going to generate an ROI. This isn't just something you write off your taxes. So it shows me that you don't have a seriousness in it. And the way that you approach it is from a charity perspective. Now, let's go even further to how they worded and the language they use. The language they use was not, this is a $2 million fund opportunity. They use language like, well, Ben Horowitz and his wife are going to match, $5 million for these donations. That is where their good intentions went completely left. Because what you're now positioning this as is that these are people that we just need to give money to because there's an oppressive system. No, what you're looking at is this is an opportunity for you because you have not looked at these amazing founders, because of how, and we probably get into that later, because of how you have been looking for deal flow, you sit in your silos. A lot of us do this, no matter what side you're on, is we stick with our own networks. So you end up getting the same thing over and over. But now you're saying, well, we want to do something different, but we're going to make it charity. No, we're just saying, let us be at the table. Give us a chance. Just give us a chance, because this is an opportunity for everybody. We don't need your charity. We don't need pity. We just need you to look at us equally. That is it. That is it. No one asks you to just give money to give it. No, take this seriously, because we want to get money just as much as you do. That's the fundamental issue. And especially what I saw in terms of what inspired me to write that piece was because I was tired of it. I see it all the time. And especially with Black founders. I mean, look, the stats are there. Like by 2044, like Black and Latinx, I mean, people, millennials especially, are going to be around the majority. We have the majority spending power. We're starting companies at these crazy rates. So we are ultimately addressing markets that these people don't understand. They don't understand Black hair care. They don't understand Black products or our culture. We fundamentally know, because it's our experience. So treat it as an opportunity like you would with a Warby Parker or a WeWork. It's no different. So positioning it as charity, and I know they edited that article, but even they edited it and they ended up digging, I think, a bigger hole for themselves. Because it's like, oh, we're going to match donations. I'm like, have you ever done that in your fund ever? Right. No, you haven't. You haven't.
And Camille, did anything? I know that you were also struck by a number of things in that article. Did anything stand out for you that really struck a chord as being, the truth?
Listen, reading through Alex's article, like as I posted on LinkedIn, there are so many quotable quotes. I was like, yes, and that. But I want to emphasize what Alex was talking about in terms of this pattern, right, that we're seeing in terms of how the response is to this issue, and it's a pattern of this paternalistic type of, but we're gonna donate all this money, we're gonna make these great statements because we want you to go away. Like that is the underlying message that we're receiving. In case y'all didn't know, like that's how we're reading this. And I know, I'm sure there are some people listening or watching this and saying, but aren't you happy that these funds shouldn't you be grateful that they're giving these funds? And the answer is no. And the reason that answer is no is because, as Alex was saying, we were never looking for this handout, this magical handout that you thought we were looking for. But what we're asking for is a lot more difficult than giving a handout, because it requires a actual dismantling of the system that you've been so comforted by all of these years. And so in terms of at Buy Blacks, we cover a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of stories. And so a couple stick out in my mind. And it's actually two of them. One is an ice cream company called Sweet and Nice. And I remember covering them when they were just getting started, and, they dropped off like loads of stuff for us to try. And I'm like, this is actually amazing. Like the flavor, it literally tasted homemade. And it was their grandfather's recipe that they took and morphed and kept going, right? A Trinidadian company. And speaking to the founder, he told me that when he went to seek funding, went in front of angel investors and VCs, and the pattern that he saw was that they were telling him, it's too niche. We don't think that you'll be able to take this out of the Caribbean community. We don't feel like your team is well placed to run like a $1 million company, even though individually it's him and his siblings who run it. They have each led other $1 million companies. Like they have their own track record. Also, if you look at the branding, you could see that they were intentional about this being a global brand. Like you just the branding, you can see they were already on point with that. And they were unable. They did the rounds. They got nothing, zero. And then he came back and I saw a press release saying that they're now in all the Sobeys, and that's a big grocery store chain, by the way, here in Canada, that they're now, because they got investment, they went to a Black investor. a man by the name of Wes Hall here in Canada, who is a very prominent investor. They went to him without even an actual pitch deck, just went to him, told him the idea, and he was in because he understood right away. I mean, I can't speak for why else he invested, but I'm going to assume that he had a deeper understanding as to how this could make him money. And no investor, no matter what color they are going to dump money into something that they don't think they're going to get a return on. So clearly it was a good business move. They're expanding more. They're now expanding into the US, and they're in every single grocery store chain across Canada.
Yep. And I actually want to, you mentioned something that is so important here when it comes back to, think of, now we've said it a couple times, pattern. So going back to even that experience that they had where they're like, we can't see this going beyond the Caribbean market because it's not a product they understand. I think that this actually reminds me of like how Vita Coco, the coconut water, happened, where they're like, you're not going to get this out of, Brazil or whatever. But I'm like, the rest of the world was using vitamin water as basically their Gatorade. And just because the US hadn't been privy to it, it's kind of like soccer here is not huge, where I'm like, the rest of the world is not football or basketball, it is soccer, So it's having that ability to see holistically. But here's the issue when it comes to the investor side, is that they're using something that you guys might have heard. It's called pattern matching. They literally use this as a form, and they'll talk about it as a form to minimize their risk on an investment. So what does pattern matching mean? It means that they're looking at things that they've invested in before themselves, or other funds. What are the fundamental patterns within each of those? In terms of the founders, the schools they went to, so on and so forth. I mean, I have a friend who is a Black fund manager who uses this. And I had to tell him, I was like, look, Aaron, like, you realize while you're doing this, it's going to keep giving you the same type of founders, even let's say if they're a different color, right? So an example would be myself.
The same thing. Mm-hmm.
It perpetuates the same thing in different ways. So let's say, I'm a good example of this. People are like, oh my God, you're a Black female founder that raised capital. You didn't come from money. My family did not invest in my companies at all. They didn't have the capital to do it. Yeah. They gave me a hug. They said, and they said, good luck. You're going to do it, Yeah. However, there's two different things that people tend to miss when they talk about my story, because I perpetuate a lot of the stereotype when it comes to these patterns. So one of them being, you'll notice a lot of people who get funded go to these quote unquote fancy, good on paper schools. I'm one of those. I went to one of the top schools in the world, University of Chicago. That gave me access to a network that I otherwise wouldn't have had access to. So the people like the Andreessen Horowitz of the world, those fund managers, those are their circles. Mm-hmm. And my degree of connection to them, I probably have 1 degree connection away from Ben Horowitz or Andreessen Horowitz. Like that's just kind of the reality of it. Whereas let's say someone who went to a state school, a community college, just because I went to that school does not make me a better founder than someone that did not receive that education. Exactly. Like my brother dropped out of college and he's a very successful entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And so I perpetuated it from that type of school. Also, the fact that my business partner, women statistically who raise capital, over 60%, nearly 70% have achieved an MBA. And my co-founder in my former company went to my school's business school. So we already had double thing. And I think the other thing here is that I call it out very often. I'm a light-skinned Black woman who is ambiguous in a lot of spaces. So there's very often times people look at me and they're like, oh, you could pass. You're accepted. And that's just the reality of it. So I use the position I'm in and the doors I've opened to talk about these truths. And especially now being on the side that I'm in, where I now get to talk to those former investors that I had and the investors that want to be a part of Get Shit Done, because we're ultimately focusing on the traction piece that helps them minimize their risk and investment. But what I have to be clear with is, from a partner perspective, is to talk about the realities and their own biases, whether it's implicit or explicit. A lot of time it is implicit. I think something Andrew mentioned earlier is that I don't think the majority are saying, I don't want to invest in those people, but we all have some type of bias towards things. So I believe it's my duty, if you're partnering with Get Shit Done and the work that we're doing, is that I have to tell you, look, you're only looking at these people that went to these schools, these people that have this type of team and that are in these industries, because that's what you're comfortable with and what you know. But if you really want to be successful and you're saying you want to have a diverse and inclusive portfolio, you can't do pattern matching. It's just not going to work, because you're going to get stuck in the same silos.
Yeah, and that's something that you and I talked about just on our practice on our test when we were testing, and I think it ties in, Camille, to some of the old school ideas of diversity and inclusion. And what was interesting to me is, I have heard on other panels and other events I've been to, VCs say, we're looking at the deals that are available. There are just less Black founders. There's just way less.
Such bullshit.
Less opportunities. And it is bullshit. And that's what's so interesting to me. And they really believe it.
Yeah.
They don't believe that they're saying something that is totally not true. But in their networks, what they're saying is, in my network, without changing anything that I do, there's not Black founders. But I think when we see there's a problem, and what really bothers me is, I think not seeing there's a problem is a problem. Like, not saying there's a problem is a problem. And Alex and I were talking about specifically about deal flow. And I think we were chatting in terms of applications coming in, but I think it can be exactly the same with deal flow coming in, where if you are looking at the applications you have coming in after posting a job or posting information about your fund, and you have Stanford, Harvard, 70% white, 20% BAME, 2% Black, and it's completely lopsided, you're losing opportunities, right? This is a investment problem. You're not getting a big section of the market of entrepreneurs or of folks that you're employing. You're missing this opportunity. And if you're not changing your approach, that's a problem, because then you're going to keep having this lopsided either employment problem or deal flow problem. But that's what we were chatting about. So I wanted to get both your thoughts on that. I think it's a really important key topic here, where they're not looking at the system of, okay, what's wrong with my system, that these are the folks who are coming into my deal flow, or these are the folks that are coming to my job application. What's wrong with my system, I think, is a real key part of this.
Yeah, I think what's difficult about that is that it requires someone to do a lot of introspection, a lot of self-questioning, and calling yourself out. If you're uncomfortable when other people are calling you out, you're not going to even be comfortable with calling your own self out. I was at South by Southwest a couple of years ago, and I attended a panel. I'm trying to remember. It had diversity in the title. So I was like, okay, cool. Let me go check this out. So I get there, and it's like the panelists there's more men than women, number one, on the panel. None of that, all of them are white. And then they get into the discussion, and it's of course focused on gender, as many of the diversity conversations have been for so long, because that is the comfortable part. And one of the panelists showed this like a clip from a doc about a woman founder who was basically documenting her experience going to seek funding. And then the male panelist basically like shit on the whole clip and was like, oh, like, why is she focusing on her being like, it was about, we're here talking about diversity, and that was his thing, right? And then there were Black women in the audience when it was question time, then came to the mic and started calling out the fact that there were no people of color on the panel, started calling out that we're only here talking about gender diversity. And it got really uncomfortable. It got really heated. They were defensive on the panel. They just shut the entire conversation down because they couldn't even handle being called out like in that setting. And so the challenge that I put out to VCs is, even in the moment of you being pitched, for example, right? Think about the questions that you're asking that person, the comments that you're making to that person. Ask yourself if you would make those comments to a white person, if it was a white person pitching you. I think about a company called Love and Nudes, a Canadian company that makes, like, this is a no-brainer to me. Like, she makes bras and underwear in actual nude colors. Now, if you're a white woman or male, like, you would have never experienced going into the pantyhose section or the lingerie section and seeing something called nude and that not being the color of your skin. Mm-hmm. That nude is white. That's our default, right? And no, it never occurred to anyone to make like nude shades that are like women that look like me or darker than me. And so she capitalized on that. She realized that was a problem. She made this product. She told me when she goes to get funding, the first response is, I don't think that's going to work because it's just going to be too onerous for a store to carry that many different shades. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense because there are different shades of lipstick. There are different shades of all different types of things. But that's the response that she gets, that, it's going to be way too much trouble. Mm. And so, again, ask yourself, would you say that to somebody who wasn't Black? Like, you have to start holding yourself accountable. And let me be clear. Like, I'm not saying to investors, like, okay, you need to go out and like find all the Black, founders. Make yourself accessible. Like, I'm just saying, like, I'm pretty sure that you are discounting, that you are ignoring a lot of different kinds of people that you have written off because of how they present. Yeah. Whereas meanwhile, like, there's some Black female founders here who call this actually, her name is Vivian K. She has this thing where she says, like, do be like Chad. Like, Chad is a mediocre white man who can get millions of dollars in funding, who can roll up in a hoodie and board shorts and get your money. But meanwhile, I'm like over presenting in my little lipstick and my makeup, make sure I'm looking good. But to you, I'm like, you're like, I don't think you can do it. I don't think you're capable. You have to hold yourself accountable. Ask yourself why.
Yeah. And I think you bring up something really, really important in terms of, it brought to mind recently, I think it was Missy Elliott. I saw her tweet. She was like, privilege is also when you discount a problem because you're not affected by it. And I think that's what we see a lot. So something Andrew and I spoke about, just trying to get to the meat of it. Because he's like, I've heard so many of these things, but what's the real problem? And I remember seeing his face when he was like, oh shit, it's that. Like, it sounds simple, but it's not. The simple thing is, none of these tactics, none of these strategies, none of these DEI people can do anything. I always laugh when a company hires a chief diversity officer. I'm just like, that's just your token woman or Black person or person of color that's helping you guys with PR when you guys do stupid shit. But fundamentally, they cannot move the needle if there isn't buy-in from everybody at the top. That trickles down. So something we talked about was, it's just fundamentally looking at this, like, let's just talk about funding entrepreneurs. Fundamentally looking at, why is this an opportunity for me? It's not just about the guilt and the shame part, because no one's asking for that. What is, how do we look at this as an opportunity? And if you're unwilling to do that work and to sit with it and say, wait, what has inhibited me from seeing this as the opportunity before? And also, why would this be advantageous for not just myself, but for all of us in doing that? If we're not willing to do that work and we continue to just look at these founders as That's just something I have to write off. Like, you go to church, you do your tithes. Like, no, it's not that. This is not charity. It's really about, if you want the fundamental problem to change, you have to be willing to look at all of the parts. And I say this in that article, is that you have to be willing to say, what have I done to contribute to this, or that I've been blindsided by? And now let's look at what has gotten in our way and perpetuated this. And now what can we do next? What is the solution? So if a VC is looking, or an investor is looking for deal flow through, their networks, it's, well, what are some other ways? One of the things is cold outreach. There's so many investors that will bullshit you on panels and be like, oh, we do cold outreach, but then behind closed doors, we're like, we barely ever look at that inbox. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate that people like, Dell Johnson, who was formerly at Backstage Capital, now he's doing his own. He literally like walks the talk. I've seen it. He's like, email me, cold email me. Like, this is because he is a Black investor. So he understands. He's like, because you probably did not go to my school or whatnot. So send me a cold email. And he responds to every single one. And that is why things like Backstage Capital and these newer funds that are seeing this as an opportunity and going after these markets are starting to see so much more ROI, because they are funding opportunities and people that they might not have otherwise crossed paths with, but now they've just opened up this green space. And if other funds don't get on board, they're just going to get left behind.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important, that. So first of all, I think it's easy, for folks who are in this to say, you can't solve a problem unless you can't solve a problem. The biggest problem for me is lots of folks don't see a problem, or lots of folks are like, wow, a lot of people are reacting really strongly. I'm not really understanding what's going on here. And what's so interesting to me is people in venture capital are some pretty damn intelligent folks. They're pretty fucking smart. Sorry, but these are smart people. So if you are investing, was it one? Are we at 2% Black founders right now?
Oh, it's 1% for Black founders.
1%?
1%.
If you're investing 1% in Black founders and you are an intelligent person, how can you not see a problem? How can you not go, wow, I'm missing major business. I am missing major payoff. Like as a income problem, not even as a diversity problem, as a we're fucking up our business problem. So if they're not seeing there's a problem, what's so interesting to me is obviously this is a racial issue. So if you really look, say, we're putting 1% of our money to Black founders, and people aren't getting fired because they're missing opportunities. For me, that's the issue. I'll go, okay, you don't see a problem. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why you are not seeing that. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying folks are overtly racist.
Yeah, this is what I was just going
to
say. Yeah, I was going to say, Andrew, like, I don't, want people to walk away from this feeling like, oh, because you haven't been doing this in investing.
Not at all. That's not what I'm trying to say. But implicit bias is still.
Yes. What it really means is that, and what I've found is that the idea or the concept of a Black person in power, a Black person as successful, is actually so foreign to you. And what I want you to do is to examine why that is. That's what I'm asking you to do, right? I'm not telling you you're a racist, because it is possible to do racist things and to not be a racist. It's actually two different things. And I know that's a weird concept to wrap your head around, but it's true, right? I am capable of saying racist things.
Yep.
Right. But to be a racist is something different.
Yeah.
But I need you to examine how you came to form your perceptions of people who don't look like you. I need you to sit and think about, I've done that. I grew up in the Caribbean. And that alone made me, my cultural and childhood upbringing embedded in me a bias, like a homophobic bias, because that's what I was raised in. It was only until I left the Caribbean and came back to Canada and started seeing and saying, like, wait, hold on, this does not add up. Like, what was I thinking? But if you don't take the time to examine how your biases were formed, then you won't ever get to your solution. You won't get to it. And this is the hard part. I just assumed that everyone had the type of self reflection that I have. I'm just a naturally introspective person, but I realize that it's a very difficult thing to do because it's confronting. It makes you start realizing, wait a minute, maybe 60% of the stuff that I have, I didn't actually work for. I work hard. Everybody works hard. Yes. But maybe it's true that some of this stuff I just got because of what I look like, because of how I show up in the world. Yes. And that is hard to accept. I get it. But it doesn't take away from your accomplishments. It doesn't take away from what you worked hard for in your life. It means that you have to look at it and you have to say, okay, what can I do? How can I use even 1% of what I've inherited? How can I use that to help somebody else?
Yeah,
that's what we're asking you to do.
An accountability piece, right? Like what you've heard in this conversation is both moments where Camille and I have had to sit and say, well, what have I done? Like she just said, I came up in a homophobic environment. I called out the fact that I'm a light-skinned Black woman, and I will not discount that has helped me in a lot of regards.
Big time.
Let's be real. And it, again, does not diminish your accomplishments. Just because I was a light-skinned Black woman that went to a fancy school, that did not diminish the fact that I've built badass companies. I am fucking good at what I do, like, period. And that's why I got funded, but also realizing that there are some of my darker sisters that have it, they're just as powerful, just as amazing, and they have to struggle just as hard. And I'm willing to accept that and look at it. I think when we've created a system that allows people that don't look like us, who tend to be white, it allows them to sit in their comfort. It is very hard sometimes to pull yourself out. I think that goes back to the introspective part, is that there are so many, I think one of the issues for especially a lot of my white friends that would talk about it is like, there are so many things that provide me this cushion to not look at myself, and it feels consuming. So it's more of what I appreciate was when they're like, I'm going to do the work on this. This is what I'm going to look into. This is what I'm noticing. Sometimes they'll shoot me a text like, oh shit, I just realized that, I looked at this person this way. And it's just about saying, I'm learning. We're learning together. No one's here to call you out. Like, I'm not looking to say you're fucked up, you owe me this or whatever. It's more about, let's just start from let's all take accountability for our stuff and then leverage your privileges. Like the most beautiful thing about having privilege is that it doesn't have to be weaponized, is that you can actually arm it to not only lift yourself up, but to lift others with you. So example is when I go into rooms and I get let in because I have gotten access to these circles and these networks and I look a certain way and so on and so forth, I go in there with the mindset that I'm going to get in the door, but I knock the fucking wall down. That's just who, like, I'm going to make sure, like, I put people on when people ask me to speak at things. Like, I'm like, I can't do it, but here's a list of all these people, dope people that you should talk to. Or here's, like, now I have VCs because I've started 2 companies for Get Shit Done. This is a legacy company. I'm not raising capital in the way I did before because we are dealing with a systemic problem that will not, it requires more than 5 to 7 years of an exit to really get into this. And so they're like, there's money at the table. And I'm like, great. I love that there's a lot of money right now. So here's a list of founders you need to be giving that money to because I don't need it. I don't. So it's about how do you leverage your privileges instead of feeling guilty about it. I don't feel guilty that I look the way I do. Hell no. I'm grateful where I came from, my heritage, and I use and leverage my privileges to empower myself and others. And until we're willing to alleviate the shame and the guilt around it, you are going to continue weaponizing your privilege. And it's going to go against what you could be doing to be powerful.
I love that. And I think being okay with making mistakes is important. And to be clear, when I'm chatting about what I see as a mistake, not missing a big market of founders, it's okay. Like, it's okay to screw up, and it's okay to have those conversations with folks and say the wrong thing in an area you're not educated. It also means you probably should get more educated. You should educate yourself about how to talk about these issues. But I think it's better to be discussing this and be talking about it, and to make a mistake and someone to say, "Hey, I wouldn't have phrased the article in that way," or "Hey, I wouldn't phrase the fund in that way. It's not really charity, and I don't think it should be.
No.
Here's how it should be." I think it's great to jump in and say, "Wow, I screwed up. How can I fix that? How can I move forward?"
Because at least you're trying. I would much rather someone try and fuck up than to be silent, because silence is deadly. I wrote another article that was like, your silence is lethal. There are people losing their lives because you're being silent. Like, it is, I would much rather you fuck up and say the wrong thing, anyone, and then, from there, be willing to take accountability for your fuck up. And then next step, well, what can I do moving forward? That's the education piece. Why was that wrong? Like I don't think we can move forward unless we get to the why. Like, I think people understand this is wrong, but there won't be a fundamental shift until we are willing to say this is why it's wrong, without the sense of shame around it, and saying, what can we do moving forward? Otherwise, we're going to be stuck in the same silo. You can hire that chief diversity officer. You can add more Black bodies to your payroll, but you're going to continue to objectify them until you understand why it matters. D. Ray McKay from Black Lives Matter movement said it very well. He was like, diversity is about number of bodies, and inclusion is about culture. So you can hire all these Black people, you can fund all these Black people, but until you are willing to have some honor and recognition of culture, you are just putting bodies into a system that are being objectified to the same bullshit to make yourself feel better.
Wow. Love it. Well, we've totally lost all organization, by the way. I think we jumped into the conversation. I had like a specific path I wanted to follow, but we've lost that. I don't want to keep you the whole morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. But one thing I really wanted to make sure we got time to was just a little bit. We could either call it brainstorming or call it things that you've discussed at some events or some conversations that you've had with just a couple ideas. So we've talked about some of the problems, some of the issues surrounding kind of founders and startups and investors. And any conversations that you've had or articles that you've read, what are some of the ideas for solutions, that the ways that things that we can move towards to solve some of this?
That's, it's a difficult question in itself, Andrew, only because what I'm finding is that I also do a lot of corporate training in anti-racism. And when I do like the intake call, the first thing that I'm asked is, okay, and we want to make sure like you give us some takeaways and a checklist. So we need to have like action items, like we need to know what to do. And I know it's like a human inclination to want to solve, to want to action. But in this particular journey, the first step really is education, self-education, and the introspection. That is truly, in my opinion, the first step. Specifically, speaking about Canada, the US is different because this conversation is very loud in the US. However, in Canada, we have done a marvelous job of our international branding as being, the Great White North, the savior of the Underground Railroad. Like, we're amazing. Like, everyone thinks, everything is all hunky dory in Canada. And we have literally erased the truth about Black Canadian history from, elementary school on. And if we don't sit and examine, most of the workshops, the sessions that I do have a huge historical aspect. Like the first 45 minutes is a history lesson before I even get into the workplace. Because if you don't understand that, if you don't understand the school experience for a person of color, that is actually one of the first places where you will experience racism. And as we know, the school system is set up to replicate the workplace. Like it's literally preparing you to go into the workplace. And so when you experience a microaggression of your teacher mispronouncing your name or making fun of your name or making a comment about your complexion, anything like that, and then you go and tell someone and nothing is done. That's the first time you experience that you don't matter. And then you go into the workplace, and that experience with your teacher, you now will also project that onto your manager or whoever. You're constantly looking out for who is going to harm me. Like that is the literal experience of a person of color, because you've been experiencing this from childhood, and that doesn't turn off once you get into the workplace. In fact, it's amplified. And so now when you see this huge uprising and white people are like, "Oh, what's happening?" It's literally, we've just been carrying this around in a little bag our whole lives. And only now this global conversation has happened. And we felt like, okay, screw it. We're done. And now we're talking about it. But we've been holding on to this for so long. And so if we don't examine those, like I encourage people to read, this information is not it's been hidden, but it's out there. I did it. One of the most successful campaigns we did on Buy Blacks was something called #BlackHistory365, because I got tired of only talking about Black history during February. I'm like, screw this. We're going to do a post every single day for a year about Black Canadian history. People are like, you won't have enough material. You won't be able to do it. Let me tell you, I never left my house to get the information for this campaign. I did a social post every single day for 365 days. It was all online, all in books, online museums, etc., all out there. But yet every time I posted, people are like, "Oh my gosh, I never knew this. I never heard this." I had one person even identify their great-great-great-grandfather in one of the pictures that we posted. They had never seen the photo. And I got it literally from an online museum. Like, how is that? You know what I mean? Like, that is just so wild to me that all this information has not been is out there, but not consumed. So I'd really encourage you, whatever country you're watching from, examine the hidden history of how Black people came to be in that country, and how they experience life today in that country. That's a takeaway.
Oh, that's super important. And I'm a huge fan of, I think that what we keep going back to is that personal accountability piece. Because this whole thing, like, I can't stand, and this is a completely different topic, but this is some of my issues that I have even in feminism, where it's like, we have to be the saviors of these people. And it's like, no. No one asked for that. What we want is, one of my favorite things that I saw a woman post after George Floyd, and how overwhelmed everybody was about it. And she said something so beautiful. She was like, stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. First, do what Camille said, educate, understand why, because if you have not listened to Simon Sinek's Start With Why, that's a great place to start, to understand why, like why a why is so fundamental in anything we do. And then the second piece of that is moving over to say, now, with what I know now and how I've educated myself, what is my lane? What can I do? Like, not everyone's going to be on the front lines being activists. Not everybody is going to write the checks, but we need everyone to play their position. This is an all-team sport. Like, this is not a superstar sport. This is we can have all the best passes, but if we don't get it in, like the last person that hits it in and we don't get it in, we all failed. So what can you do to stay in your lane? An example of this is one of my really good friends who is a former founder, now on the VC side. He said he had a former investor contact him, white guy, like in his 50s. And And, you know, we're very liberal or whatnot, but this guy believes in him. So older white guy. And he was like, look, I don't like what's going on. And, you know, I want to do something, but I'm not going to be at the protest. That's just not my lane. Right. He was just like, but what my lane is he's like, I know how to give money. He's like, you know, tell me where I should, asking my friend who is a black male who he had funded before and is now on the other side, where should I be deploying this capital? That is so powerful. He didn't have to go to the protest, but he did something that he was good at. And that's what we need. No one needs you to do something that is not within your wheelhouse. Activate what you're good at, even if that's just making an introduction for somebody, buying their product, posting about it, saying, I love this company and I tried their product. I think you should check it out too. That can go so far, but you have to stay in your lane, educate yourself, and figure out where can I leverage my personal privileges to lift myself up and others. That is the most powerful thing, because I think people get overwhelmed when they're like, oh my God, I have to become a historian. No, it's about what's the fundamental issue here and where can I do my part? What am I really good at? And that, just those, even if it's a small thing, that adds up, and we're all doing it, adds up to something so much greater.
I love that, and thank you for highlighting that, because I think myself, like many people, it can be pretty overwhelming when you see how big the problem is, and going, you know, how can I possibly address everything? How can I possibly jump into every issue? And you know, you can't. So thank you for that reminder. I think that's a very powerful reminder to to folks who are highly skilled in their area, and uh, want to jump in and be making some change, be making a difference. But I just want to thank both of you for the talk. I really hope that I can invite you again. I feel like there's a lot more that we can talk about.
Sure.
Our half an hour turned into an hour, and we didn't even get a third of the way through what we wanted to discuss. But you both are amazing, and thank you for your insightfulness and you know, your honesty. It's greatly appreciated.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for having
Andrew.
me.
Thanks for everyone watching.
Thank you to everybody. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. So the next two panels will be starting because it's 7 p.m. and at 7:30 the networking will start. And of course, both of you are welcome to stick around and watch other panels and network with folks. And thank you all for coming. Thank you for joining, everybody.
Thanks, Andrew.